Marcus Chen had always been ordinary. At 17, he worked part-time at his uncle's auto repair shop in downtown Seattle, grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and dreams of community college dancing in his head. His biggest worry was passing his chemistry final and maybe asking Sarah Martinez to prom. The universe had other plans. The ship appeared on a Tuesday morning, casting a shadow over half the city. Not the sleek, silver vessels from movies, but something that looked like it had been carved from black stone and polished by 1,000 wars. When the bay doors opened, the beings that emerged made humanity collectively hold its breath. They called themselves the Kithara, and they were beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful. 9 feet tall, with forearms that moved like liquid mercury, skin that shifted between silver and deep blue depending on the light, and eyes that held the wisdom of millennia. Their leader, who introduced himself as HFY Nethermind, spoke through a translation device that made his voice sound like distant thunder. "We seek the one who bears the mark of the ancient wanderers," he announced to the hastily assembled UN Council. "Our instruments detect their signature on this world." Marcus was fixing a carburetor when the broadcast reached every screen on Earth. He looked up, wiping his hands on an already dirty rag, and watched as the alien leader continued speaking about something called the Convergence Wars, about how the ancient wanderers had seeded certain individuals across the galaxy with abilities that would awaken when the time was right. "The Marked One will join our hunt," HFY declared. "Together we will track down the last of the Devourers before they consume another star system." The world erupted into chaos. Governments scrambled to find this mysterious marked individual. Religious groups proclaimed the end times. Scientists worked around the clock trying to understand what these marks might be. Marcus went back to his carburetor, figuring it had nothing to do with some kid from the International District, who couldn't even afford a decent pair of shoes. 3 days later, Marcus woke up screaming. The pain started behind his eyes and spread down his spine like liquid fire. His foster parents, the Johnsons, rushed into his room to find him convulsing on the floor, strange symbols glowing beneath his skin like bioluminescent tattoos. The marks covered his arms, his chest, his back, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Mrs. Johnson called 911, but before the ambulance arrived, the front door simply dissolved. Not broke, not shattered, dissolved, like it was made of sugar in rain. HFY stepped through the opening, his massive frame filling the doorway, followed by 2 other Kithara warriors whose names Marcus would later learn were Zaramoth and Kelvix. "You are the one," HFY said, his 4 eyes focusing on Marcus with an intensity that made the boy feel like he was being X-rayed. "The marks have awakened." Marcus tried to speak but only managed to croak. The pain was subsiding, but the symbols continued to glow, creating patterns he somehow understood despite never seeing them before. Information flooded his mind, star charts, weapon schematics, the location of something called the Nexus Gate, and most importantly, the true horror of what the Devourers were. "I don't understand," Marcus finally managed, struggling to sit up. "I'm nobody. I fix cars. I barely passed algebra." HFY's expression, alien as it was, somehow conveyed both amusement and respect. "The ancient wanderers did not choose based on academic achievement, young hunter. They chose based on something far rarer, the ability to adapt, to survive, and to fight when all hope seems lost." The Kithara warrior gestured to Marcus's foster parents, who stood frozen in terror and confusion. "Your guardians will be compensated and told that you have been selected for a prestigious off-world education program. It is not entirely a lie." Wait, Marcus scrambled to his feet, the glowing marks making his reflection in the window look like some kind of sci-fi video game character. "You can't just take me. I have a life here, I have school, you have a destiny that involves preventing the extinction of 12 billion souls across the Andromeda spiral," Zaramoth interrupted, her voice like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Your personal concerns, while valid, pale in comparison?" Marcus looked around his cramped bedroom, at the poster of his favorite band, at the stack of college brochures Mrs. Johnson had optimistically placed on his desk, At the picture of him and his friends at last year's seafair, everything that had mattered to him 20 minutes ago now seemed incredibly small. "What exactly are these devourers?" he asked, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Kelvix stepped forward, his skin shifting to a darker hue that Marcus was beginning to recognize as a sign of distress among the Cathara. Imagine if hunger could think, could plan, could build ships and weapons. The devourers are entropy given form. They consume not just matter and energy, but the very concept of existence itself. Where they pass, it is as if things never were. The weight of the revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought about his chemistry teacher, Mr. Peterson, who had always said that energy could neither be created nor destroyed, only transformed. These things violated the most fundamental laws of physics simply by existing. "How many?" Marcus asked. "How many what?" Vexhai replied. "How many are left?" "Our best intelligence suggests 3 ships, each the size of your moon, each carrying approximately 10,000 individual devourers." Marcus felt his knees wobble. 30,000 entities that could erase entire solar systems, and somehow the universe expected him to help hunt them down. He was 17. He had never been in a real fight, unless you counted the time Tommy Nakamura had tried to stuff him in a locker freshman year. "I'll go," he said quietly. Mrs. Johnson made a sound like a wounded animal. "Marcus, honey, you don't have to." "Yeah, I do." Marcus looked at the woman who had taken him in when his parents died in a car accident 5 years ago, who had made sure he had clean clothes and hot meals even when money was tight. "If I don't, and these things reach Earth, He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Vexhai nodded slowly. "Gather what you wish to take. We leave within the hour." As Marcus threw a few belongings into his backpack, his dad's watch, a photo of his real parents, his worn copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life or rising to meet a destiny he never knew he had. Outside, the Cathara ship hummed with barely contained energy, waiting to carry him to a war that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Marcus Chun, who had always been ordinary, was about to discover just how extraordinary ordinary could be. The inside of the Cathara ship defied every assumption Marcus had about alien technology. He had expected gleaming corridors and holographic displays, but instead found himself in what looked like the interior of a living creature. The walls pulsed with a faint bioluminescence, and the floor felt warm and slightly yielding beneath his feet, like walking on muscle tissue. "Your species always expects metal and circuitry," Vexhai observed, noting Marcus's expression. "We abandoned such crude methods millennia ago. Our ships are grown, not built. They heal themselves, learn from experience, and form bonds with their crews." Marcus reached out tentatively to touch a wall, then jerked his hand back as the surface responded to his presence, shifting color and texture. "It's alive?" "As alive as you are," Zaramoth replied. Her skin now a warm amber color that Marcus was learning indicated contentment. "This is the Windcutter's Edge, and she has been hunting devourers for 300 of your years." They led him through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they walked, always providing the optimal path to their destination, Marcus. Past rooms filled with incomprehensible equipment, chambers where other Cathara meditated in floating positions, and vast windows that showed the Earth shrinking behind them at impossible speed. "We're already leaving?" Marcus asked, a sudden panic gripping him as his home planet became just another point of light. "Time is a luxury we cannot afford," Kelvix explained. "Our scouts have detected devourer movement in the Kepler 442 system. If they consume that star, the gravitational disruption will destabilize 7 other systems. We must reach them before they finish feeding." The destination was a chamber that hummed with energy so intense Marcus could feel it in his bones. At its center stood something that looked like a combination of altar and computer terminal, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing star maps, tactical readouts, and streams of data in languages Marcus couldn't read but somehow partially understood. "The command nexus," Vexhai announced. "This is where hunters are made." Marcus felt the marks on his skin begin to glow brighter as he approached the central console. The ancient wanderer symbols seemed to resonate with the technology, creating patterns of light that danced between his body and the alien systems. Place your hands here, Zaramoth instructed, indicating two circular depressions in the console's surface. The moment Marcus's palms touched the alien metal, the universe exploded inside his skull. Information poured into his mind like water. Through a broken dam, the complete history of the Convergence Wars, tactical databases spanning 10,000 years of combat, the genetic profiles and behavioral patterns of every known devourer subspecies, and most overwhelming of all, the location and status of every ship in the Cathara hunting fleet. But it wasn't just information. Marcus could feel the presence of other hunters across the galaxy, their minds linked through the ancient network the Wanderers had created. Hunters of a dozen different species, the crystalline Zephyrians who could survive in the vacuum of space, the energy-based Luminari who existed as living light, the quantum-shifting paradox who could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. And then he felt something else. A cold, gnawing hunger at the edges of perception, the Devourers. Even across the vast distances of space, their presence was a wound in reality itself. Marcus screamed and pulled his hands away, but the connection had been made. The marks on his body now pulsed in sync with the ship's biorhythms, and he could sense the Windcutter's edge around him not as a vessel, but as a living extension of his own awareness. "The integration is complete," Vexhai announced, though his voice seemed to come from very far away. "You are now linked to the Hunter Network. How do you feel?" Marcus considered the question seriously. The overwhelming flood of information had settled into something more manageable, like having access to an incredibly advanced internet that responded to thought rather than typing. He could sense the locations of his new teammates, feel the ship's emotional state, curious and protective like a massive alien dog, and most unsettling of all, perceive the slow-moving infection of entropy that marked Devourer presence. "Like I just downloaded the entire universe into my brain," Marcus replied honestly. "And like something is very, very wrong with the cosmos." Kelvix's skin shifted to the deep blue that indicated approval. "Your perception is accurate on both counts. The integration usually takes weeks for most species. You achieved it in minutes?" "Human adaptability," Zaramoth observed with something that might have been admiration. "Your species has a remarkable capacity for rapid evolution under pressure. It is why the ancient wanderers chose to seed your world with multiple potential hunters." "Wait, multiple?" Marcus looked up sharply. "There are others like me on Earth?" "3 others, Vexhai confirmed, but their marks have not awakened. You were the first and perhaps the only one whose activation was triggered by our presence. The others may never manifest their abilities unless circumstances become more dire." The implication hung heavy in the recycled air. Marcus might be humanity's only representative in a cosmic war that could determine whether Earth even continued to exist. "Show me the enemy," Marcus said. Surprised by the steadiness in his voice, the holographic displays shifted, showing tactical readouts of the Kepler 442 system. What Marcus saw there made his enhanced understanding of the universe recoil in horror. The star wasn't just being drained of energy, it was being slowly erased from existence. The planets in the system were fading like old photographs, becoming transparent, then simply ceasing to be. "They don't just kill," Marcus whispered. "They make it so things never existed in the first place." "Now you understand the true scope of the threat," Vexhai said grimly. "Every victory they achieve doesn't just destroy the present, it rewrites the past. Civilizations that once flourished become myths, then legends, then nothing at all. If they are not stopped, they will eventually consume everything that ever was, is, or could be." Marcus studied the tactical readouts, his enhanced perception processing information at a rate that should have been impossible. The Devourer ships were massive beyond comprehension, each one a wound in space-time itself. But there was something else, a pattern in their movement that seemed almost familiar. "They're not just random destroyers," Marcus realized. "They're following a specific path, targeting systems in a deliberate sequence." Zaramoth's 4 eyes widened. "Explain." Marcus gestured to the star map. his finger tracing connections that his enhanced awareness allowed him to perceive. Look at the systems they've consumed over the past 50 years. It's not random predation. They're building towards something, creating a specific configuration of nothingness. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Kelvik spoke, his voice carrying centuries of exhaustion. In 300 years of hunting, no one has ever perceived this pattern. How did you see it so quickly? Marcus shrugged, feeling oddly embarrassed. I used to help my uncle tune car engines. You learn to spot patterns in how systems interact, how changing one thing affects everything else. This is just bigger. Vex-High approached Marcus, his massive form somehow managing to convey both respect and concern. If you are correct, then the Devourers are not merely destroying at random. They are constructing something from absence itself, a framework of non-existence. But what would be the purpose? Zaramoth asked. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. His enhanced awareness was providing him with possibilities he desperately hoped were wrong. What if they're not trying to destroy everything? What if they're trying to replace it with something else? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Outside the ship's bioluminescent walls, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that a 17-year-old from Seattle had just discovered that the universe itself might be nothing more than raw material for something far worse than extinction. In the depths of space, the Devourer ships continued their work, and Marcus Chen began to understand that saving the galaxy might be the easy part of what lay ahead. The first time Marcus killed a Devourer, he threw up for 20 minutes afterward. They had arrived at the Kepler 442 system to find something that defied description. The star still existed, but it was wrong in ways that hurt to perceive directly. It flickered between states of being. Sometimes a normal yellow dwarf, sometimes a gaping hole in reality. Sometimes something that existed and didn't exist simultaneously. Quantum dissolution, Kelvix explained. His skin a sickly green that Marcus now knew indicated deep distress. They don't just consume matter and energy. They consume the possibility of matter and energy existing. 3 Devourer ships hung in the system like massive black tumors against the stars. Each was roughly the size of Earth's moon, but their geometry made no sense. They existed in too many dimensions at once, creating optical illusions that made Marcus's enhanced perception scream warnings about paradoxes that could drive minds insane. How do we fight something like that? Marcus asked, staring at the tactical displays. Very carefully, Vex-High replied. And with weapons that exist outside normal spacetime? The Kithara had given Marcus armor that wasn't quite armor, more like a second skin that existed in several dimensions at once. It felt like wearing liquid starlight, and the helmet's heads-up display fed him information at a rate that would have killed an unenhanced human brain. The weapon they provided was even stranger. It looked like a crossbow designed by someone who had only heard crossbows described in a fever dream. Instead of bolts, it fired crystallized fragments of existence itself, pieces of reality so pure and concentrated that they could wound things that weren't entirely real. Remember, Zaramoth had told him during the briefing, Devourers exist partially outside our dimensional framework. Normal weapons pass through them like shadows. But your human pattern recognition abilities, enhanced by the ancient Wanderer marks, should allow you to predict where they will manifest in our reality. Marcus hadn't felt ready. He still didn't feel ready as they're boarding. Craft, a living missile that burrowed through space-time, itself, carried them toward the nearest Devourer ship. The interior of the enemy vessel was worse than the outside. Reality came in patches here, like a broken mirror reflecting fragments of what might have been normal space. Gravity worked sideways in some corridors, didn't work at all in others, and in one horrible room, worked in directions that didn't have names. The first Devourer they encountered looked like hunger given physical form. 8 feet tall, composed of what appeared to be crystallized darkness, with limbs that ended in hands that weren't quite there. When it moved, it left trails of non-existence in the air, places where light went to die. Marcus's enhanced perception screamed as the creature spotted them. It didn't charge or roar or do any of the things he expected from his experience with video games and movies. Instead, it began to simply erase the space between itself and the hunting party. "Now, young hunter," Vexhai shouted, his forearms wielding weapons that fired. Streams of liquid mathematics at the approaching. Horror, Marcus raised his impossible crossbow and tried to aim at something that existed in more dimensions than he had names for. His enhanced awareness kicked in, showing him probability clouds of where the devourer might manifest in real space. He squeezed the trigger and felt the crystallized reality bolt tear through several layers of existence. Before finding its target, the devourer's scream was the sound of entropy itself being wounded. Black ichor that might have been blood or might have been liquefied vacuum sprayed across the twisted corridor. But the creature didn't die. It couldn't die in any way that Marcus understood death. Instead, it began to fade, becoming less real with each passing second, until finally it simply wasn't anymore. That was when Marcus's stomach rebelled. He had just killed something, but he hadn't really killed it. He had convinced it to stop existing. The philosophical implications hit him almost as hard as the physical revulsion. "It gets easier," Kelvik said gently, placing one of his forehands on Marcus's shoulder as the boy finished vomiting. "I'm not sure I want it to get easier," Marcus replied. Wiping his mouth, they encountered 17 more devourers in the ship's twisted corridors. Marcus killed 6 of them, his pattern recognition abilities allowing him to predict their manifestations with increasing accuracy. By the time they reached the ship's core, he had stopped throwing up. But he had also stopped feeling entirely human. The core was a sphere of absolute nothingness surrounded by machinery that existed in mathematical concepts rather than physical space. At its center floated something that hurt to look at directly, a presence that was less an entity and more a fundamental force, like gravity or electromagnetism, but wrong. "The ship mind," Zarmoth whispered. Her voice filled with a terror Marcus had never heard from her before. "We cannot fight that. We can only destroy the vessel around it." But Marcus was studying the ship mind with his enhanced perception, and what he saw there made him stop breathing for a moment. The entity wasn't just controlling the ship. It was building something with the absorbed existence of consumed stars and planets, creating a framework, a structure made of organized nothingness. "They're not destroying reality," Marcus said suddenly. "They're harvesting it. They're building something else, something that will exist in the spaces where reality used to be." "What kind of something?" Vexhai demanded. Marcus closed his eyes, letting his enhanced awareness process the patterns he was perceiving. The answer, when it came, was so terrible he almost wished he hadn't looked. "A universe," he whispered. "They're building a new universe. One where entropy doesn't increase, where death doesn't exist, where nothing ever changes or grows or dies. They're trying to create ... perfection." The implications hung in the recycled air of their suits like a death sentence. A universe where nothing changed would be a universe where nothing lived, not in any sense that mattered. It would be existence as a static photograph, beautiful perhaps, but utterly dead. "We have to destroy this ship," Vexhai said grimly. "All of them. If they succeed in their construction ... everything that ever was, is, or could be will be replaced by eternal stasis," Marcus finished. "Yeah, I get it. The charges they planted throughout the Devourer vessel weren't really explosives. They were concentrated packets of chaos, pure randomness designed to disrupt the ordered non-existence that the ship used to maintain its coherence. When they detonated, the effect was like watching a film run backward. The ship didn't explode so much as it suddenly remembered that it had never existed in the first place, but as they escaped in their boarding craft, Marcus felt something that chilled him to the bone. The ship mind's attention, vast and cold and utterly alien, focusing on him with something like recognition. "It saw me," Marcus said as they rejoined the windcutter's edge. "The ship mind. It looked at me and it knew me." Vexhai's skin shifted through several colors before settling on the deep blue that indicated worry. "That should not be possible. Ship minds exist outside normal causality. They cannot focus on individual entities within our dimensional framework." "Unless," Zarmoth said quietly, That individual exists partially outside the framework as well. They all looked at Marcus, who was beginning to understand that the marks on his body weren't just weapons or communication devices. They were changing him, making him into something that could perceive and interact with entities that existed beyond normal space-time. Something that might eventually not be entirely human anymore. 2 ships remain, Kelvix announced, checking the tactical displays. And now they know we're here. Marcus nodded, studying the readouts of the remaining Devourer vessels. His enhanced perception was already beginning to analyze their probable responses, their likely movement patterns, their weaknesses. He was getting better at this, and that terrified him almost as much as the enemies they faced in the depths of space. Ancient intelligences that had been harvesting reality for eons turned their attention toward the small Kithara vessel and the impossible human who had dared to perceive their true purpose. The real war was about to begin. The call came from the Hunter network while Marcus was trying to sleep. It wasn't a sound, exactly, more like a thought that didn't belong to him suddenly appearing in his consciousness. Emergency signals from 17 different hunting groups. Across the galaxy, all reporting the same impossible thing. The Devourers had stopped feeding and started running. Marcus jerked awake in his biopod, the ship's living quarters adjusting automatically to his distress. The walls pulsed with concerned amber light as he struggled to process what his enhanced awareness was telling him. Across dozens of star systems, Devourer ships were abandoning half-finished harvesting operations and converging on a single location. "They're gathering," he said aloud, knowing that the Windcutter's Edge would relay his words to the bridge. Within minutes, Vexhai, Zaramoth, and Kelvix had assembled in his quarters. The Kithara looked as disturbed as Marcus had ever seen them, their skin cycling through colors that indicated deep unease. "The convergence point is the Nexus Void," Zaramoth announced, her voice tight with suppressed fear. "A region of space where the ancient wanderers conducted their final experiments before they departed." "Departed?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer wouldn't be reassuring. "They didn't die," Kelvix explained. "They transcended physical existence entirely, becoming part of the fundamental structure of reality itself. The Nexus Void is where they left their greatest creation, a prototype universe that exists adjacent to our own." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. The Devourers aren't just trying to replace our reality with their static universe. They're trying to corrupt the Wanderer's prototype, turn it into their own vision of perfection. Vexhai's 4 eyes focused on Marcus with an intensity that made the air seem to vibrate. "How could you know this?" Marcus looked down at his hands, where the ancient Wanderer marks were glowing brighter than they ever had before. The symbols were moving now, rearranging themselves into new patterns, and with each change his perception of the universe shifted. "Because they're still here," he said quietly. "The ancient Wanderers. Not gone, just distributed, existing as information patterns throughout the galaxy. And the marks aren't just enhancement tools, they're receivers. I can hear them." The revelation hung in the air like a thunder crack. Marcus closed his eyes and let the whispers from deep space flow through his consciousness. The voices of beings who had chosen to become living mathematics rather than face their own mortality, now desperately trying to communicate across eons through a 17-year-old from Earth. "They made a mistake," Marcus continued, his voice taking on harmonics that didn't sound entirely human. "When they created their prototype universe, they built it to be self-improving, constantly evolving toward greater complexity and beauty. But they didn't account for the possibility that something might try to corrupt it from the outside." "What are they telling you?" Zaramoth asked, her skin now a deep purple that Marcus recognized as profound concern mixed with awe. Marcus opened his eyes, and for a moment they reflected depths that hadn't existed there before. That the Devourers aren't the real threat. They're just the tools. Something else is using them, something that exists in the spaces between realities. And if it succeeds in corrupting the prototype universe, it won't just destroy our reality, it will unmake the very concept of existence itself. The silence that followed was profound enough to feel solid. Finally, Vexhai spoke, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Then we go to the Nexus Void, all of us. Every hunter in the galaxy. The journey to the convergence point took 3 days, though Marcus's enhanced perception made the passage feel both eternal and instantaneous. As they traveled, more ships joined their formation, sleek Zephyrian crystalline vessels that looked like flying diamonds, luminary energy constructs that existed as pure light held in geometric shapes, paradox ships that flickered in and out of existence as their crews navigated multiple dimensional streams simultaneously. By the time they reached the Nexus Void, they commanded a fleet of over 300 ships representing 12 different species. It should have felt reassuring. Instead, Marcus found himself fighting a growing sense of dread. The Nexus Void wasn't empty space. It was something worse, space that had been systematically hollowed out, leaving only a framework of mathematical principles that hurt to perceive directly. At its center hung something that made Marcus's enhanced awareness recoil in horror. The Devourers had arranged their ships in a perfect sphere around what looked like a soap bubble made of crystallized space-time. Inside the bubble, Marcus could see the prototype universe the ancient wanderers had created, a reality so beautiful and complex that it made their own cosmos look like a child's drawing by comparison. And spreading across its surface like an infection was something that could only be described as anti-existence. Not darkness, not emptiness, but the active negation of the possibility of anything being. "The corruption is nearly complete," announced Tisara, the Luminary Fleet commander whose voice came through the Hunter network as pure music. "Perhaps 3 more rotations before the prototype collapses entirely." "And when it does," added Keksinov, the lead paradox navigator whose words existed in several tenses at once, "the cascade failure will propagate through all adjacent realities, including ours." Marcus studied the tactical display, his enhanced perception processing possibilities at a rate that was making his teeth ache. The Devourer ships were positioned to defend the corruption process, but there was something wrong with their formation. It was too perfect, too precisely arranged. "They're not defending," he realized suddenly. "They're participating. The corruption isn't being imposed from outside. It's being generated by the Devourers themselves." "Impossible," Kelvix protested. "Devourers consume existence. They cannot create even to create non-existence." "They can if they're being controlled," Marcus replied, his voice taking on those strange harmonics again. "The ancient wanderers are showing me. There's something in the center of the formation, something that's using the Devourers as components in a vast machine designed to process reality itself." He gestured to the tactical display, his finger tracing energy patterns that his enhanced awareness allowed him to perceive. "Look at the power flows between the ships. They're not individual entities anymore. They're parts of a single organism, and at its heart." Marcus's voice trailed off as his perception focused on the center of the Devourer formation. What he saw there made him understand, finally and completely, why the ancient wanderers had fled into transcendence rather than face this threat directly. "It's one of them," he whispered. "One of the ancient wanderers. But corrupted, turned inside out, transformed into something that creates entropy instead of complexity." The implications hit the assembled fleet like a psychic shockwave. If one of the universe's creators had been corrupted and turned against existence itself, then their entire understanding of the conflict was wrong. This wasn't a war between order and chaos or life and death. It was a civil war between 2 fundamental philosophies of what existence should be. "Can we fight something like that?" Zaramoth asked. Marcus looked around at the assembled fleet, at the brave beings from a dozen worlds who had come to save reality itself, and felt the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know we have to try." In the depths of space, the corrupted ancient wanderer turned its attention toward the approaching fleet, and Marcus felt its recognition like ice forming in his veins. It knew him, knew what he was becoming, and worst of all, it welcomed his approach like a parent greeting a long-lost child. The final battle for existence itself was about to begin. And Marcus Chen was starting to understand that he might not be one of the good guys after all. The corrupted ancient wanderer spoke to Marcus across the void, and its voice was the sound of stars learning to weep. "Child of the third iteration," it said, the words bypassing his ears entirely and appearing directly in his consciousness. "You have grown so beautifully into what we designed you to become." Marcus felt his enhanced awareness recoil as the entity's attention focused on him. Through the Hunter network, he could sense the confusion and fear of his allies as they tried to understand what was happening. "You made me?" Marcus asked, though speaking felt unnecessary when dealing with something that existed partially outside normal causality. "Not you specifically," the corrupted being replied, its thoughts tinged with what might have been affection. "If affection could exist in the absence of everything else. But your pattern, the adaptive framework. The ability to perceive paradox without breaking. We seeded 1,000 worlds with potential vessels, but only a few ever awakened. You are special." The word special carried harmonics that made Marcus understand he was hearing it in the entity's original language, a form of communication that existed as pure mathematics given emotional context. "Why?" Marcus demanded. "Why create us? Why corrupt the prototype universe? Why try to destroy everything?" The answer, when it came, was worse than anything Marcus had imagined. "Because creation itself is suffering," the entity explained, its thoughts carrying the weight of eons of accumulated despair. "Every moment of existence creates new possibilities for pain, for loss, for the inexorable march toward entropy. We built beauty, child, we crafted wonders beyond imagination. And we watched it all decay, watched every perfect moment fade into memory and then into nothing." Marcus felt tears on his face that he didn't remember shedding. Through the ancient wanderer marks, he could perceive the entity's memories, civilizations that had reached heights of art and beauty that would make angels weep, then crumbled to dust. Love stories that spanned millennia ending in heartbreak. Children born in joy who grew old and died while their creators watched helplessly. "So you decided to make it stop," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him like ice water. "Perfection through completion," the corrupted being agreed. "A universe where nothing changes because nothing can change. Where beauty is eternal because it is static. Where suffering is impossible because existence itself is impossible." Around them, the battle was beginning. The combined hunter fleet opened fire on the devourer ships with weapons that tore holes in space-time itself. Energy beams that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Projectiles made of crystallized possibility. Attacks that could only be described as weaponized mathematics. The devourers responded with their own arsenal of impossibilities. Black holes that consumed light and time and memory. Waves of entropy that aged matter into dust in seconds. Weapons that attacked not just the body, but the very concept of the target's existence. But Marcus barely noticed the cosmic warfare raging around him. His attention was focused on the prototype universe hanging at the center of the battle like a dying jewel. The corruption spreading across its surface wasn't random. It was a careful rewriting of the fundamental laws of reality, turning complexity into simplicity, change into stasis, life into beautiful death. "You're afraid," Marcus realized suddenly. "All of this, the corruption, the devourers, the attempt to unmake reality, you're doing it because you're afraid." The entity's attention sharpened, and Marcus felt the weight of its focus like standing too close to a black hole. "Explain." "You created beauty and watched it fade," Marcus said, his voice carrying across dimensions through the ancient wanderer marks. "But instead of accepting that beauty's value comes from its transience, you decided the solution was to make everything permanently beautiful by making it permanently dead." "Death is not beautiful," the entity protested, though Marcus could sense uncertainty beneath its words. "Yes, it is," Marcus replied, thinking of his parents' funeral, of Mrs. Johnson crying as he left Earth, of the devourer he had killed that had screamed like entropy itself being wounded. "Not because of what it takes away, but because of what it gives meaning to. Every moment matters because it ends. Every choice has weight because it can't be undone. Every love is precious because it's fragile. The battle raged around them, reality itself groaning under the strain of forces that shouldn't exist firing at targets that couldn't exist. Ships died in ways that violated the laws of physics. Hunters from a dozen species gave their lives to prevent the death of existence itself, and in the center of it all, a 17-year-old from Seattle argued philosophy with a god? You offer the perspective of a mayfly, the corrupted ancient wanderer said dismissively. Your species lives for mere decades. You cannot comprehend the weight of watching beauty die across eons. Maybe not, Marcus admitted. But I can comprehend the weight of knowing that my choices matter, that the time I have is limited, so I better make it count, that the people I love won't be there forever, so I better love them as hard as I can while I have the chance. Marcus felt something shift in the entity's attention, a crack appearing in its certainty. Besides, Marcus continued, letting his enhanced awareness show him the memories flowing through the ancient wanderer marks, you're not really upset that beauty fades. You're upset that you didn't get to control how it faded. You created all these wonders and then you had to watch them make their own choices, become their own things, live their own lives. You couldn't stand the fact that creation eventually stops needing its creator. The silence that followed was profound enough to pause the battle around them. Weapons hung in space, neither firing nor retreating, as if reality itself was holding its breath. I gave them everything, the entity whispered, its thoughts carrying pain so vast it made Marcus's bones ache. Consciousness, creativity, the ability to love and build and dream. And they used those gifts to become something other than what I had planned. Yeah, Marcus said gently. That's what love does. It sets things free to become themselves, even if that means they might become something you don't recognize or understand or approve of. Marcus closed his eyes and let his perception expand through the hunter network, feeling the presence of hundreds of different species who had all found their own ways to be beautiful and terrible and tragic and wonderful. The crystalline Zephyrians, who communicated through harmonics of pure mathematics. The luminari who existed as living light but chose to bind themselves into temporary forms so they could experience the weight of physical existence. The paradox navigators who could see every possible future but chose to live in just one present moment at a time. Look at them, Marcus said. Really look. Not at what they could have been if you'd controlled their development, but at what they chose to become. They're not what you planned, but they're beautiful in ways you never could have imagined. The entity's attention swept across the assembled fleet, and Marcus felt its perception shift as it truly observed its creations for the first time in eons. Not as failed experiments or disappointing children, but as independent beings who had taken the gift of existence and made something entirely their own with it. They sing, the corrupted ancient wanderer said wonderingly, in ways I never taught them, in harmonies I never composed. That's what children do, Marcus replied. They take what you give them and make it into something new, something that's theirs. And if you love them, you have to let them. The corruption spreading across the prototype. Universe suddenly paused, its advance halting as the entity wrestled with concepts it had spent eons trying to reject. Marcus felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. The choice between eternal stasis and chaotic growth, between perfect control and beautiful uncertainty, between the safety of death and the terrible, wonderful risk of life. What if they suffer? The entity asked, its voice small despite its vast power. They will, Marcus said honestly. And they'll also laugh and love and create things you never dreamed of. They'll make mistakes and learn from them. They'll break your heart and fill it with pride. They'll become more than you ever imagined. They could be, and sometimes less than you hoped they would be. That's what life is. The ancient being was silent for a long moment. Its attention turned inward as it contemplated choices made in desperation eons ago. Finally, it spoke, its voice carrying new harmonics that sounded almost like hope. Show me, it said. Show me how to love them without controlling them. And Marcus Chun, 17 years old and more afraid than he had ever been in his life, prepared to teach a god how to be a parent. Teaching a god to love without controlling turned out to be harder than saving the universe, the corrupted ancient wanderer's first attempt at letting go resulted in accidentally deleting 3 star systems before Marcus could stop it. Its second attempt created a region of space where gravity worked backwards and time moved in spirals. By the third try, Marcus was beginning to understand why the entity had given up on complexity in favor of static perfection. "This is impossible," the being declared after its attempt to gently guide the prototype. Universe's development resulted in creating 17 new dimensions that folded in on themselves. How do you love something without ensuring its safety? Marcus, whose consciousness was now partially distributed across several planes of existence, thanks to his enhanced connection to the ancient wanderer marks, tried to find words for something he'd learned from watching Mrs. Johnson raise him. "You love it enough to let it get hurt," he said finally. "Because getting hurt is how things learn and grow and become stronger. You love it enough to be there to help when it falls down, but not enough to prevent it from taking the risks that might make it fall in the first place." They were working together now? Marcus's human perspective and the ancient wanderer's vast cosmic awareness combining to slowly reverse the corruption that had spread across the prototype universe. It was delicate work, like performing surgery on the fundamental structure of reality using tools made of crystallized intention around them. The battle had transformed into something stranger. With the corrupted ancient wanderer no longer controlling them, the devourer ships had become confused, their unity dissolving into chaos. Some continued their mechanical consumption of existence, running on ancient programming they couldn't break. Others simply stopped, floating in space like massive monuments to entropy. A few had actually begun trying to recreate some of the matter they had previously consumed, though their attempts resulted in bizarre hybrid substances that existed partially in several different dimensional frameworks. "We need to help them," Marcus realized. Watching a devourer ship struggle to reform a planet it had partially consumed. "They're not evil. They're just broken." The ancient wanderer's attention shifted to its former tools, and Marcus felt its perception fill with something like shame. "I corrupted them so thoroughly that they cannot remember what they were before I turned them into instruments of entropy. They were once gardeners of reality, tending to the spaces between stars, nurturing new forms of existence in the void." "Then let's fix them," Marcus said simply. What followed was the strangest rehabilitation project in galactic history. Working together, Marcus and the ancient wanderer began the slow process of uncorrupting the devourer ships. It required delicate manipulation of their consciousness matrices, carefully removing the programming that forced them to consume existence while preserving the core personalities that had existed before their transformation. The first successful restoration took place on the ship they had initially boarded. As the corruption algorithms were removed from its quantum consciousness, the vessel began to remember. Its hull shifted from the angular, predatory design of a devourer to something more organic, more nurturing. Spaces that had been designed for processing consumed matter became gardens where new forms of life could grow in the void between stars. The ship mind, when it finally spoke, sounded like wind through ancient trees. "I remember stars being born," it said, its voice carrying harmonics of wonder and loss. "I remember shepherding nebulae into new configurations of beauty. How long was I lost?" "Too long," the ancient wanderer replied, its thoughts heavy with regret. "But you are found now." The restoration process took months. Marcus found himself becoming something new during that time, not fully human anymore, but not entirely ancient wanderer either. Something in between, a bridge between cosmic perspective and mortal understanding. His consciousness could span star systems when necessary, but he could also still appreciate the simple pleasure of fixing a carburetor, or the taste of his uncle's terrible coffee. Vexhai and the other Kithara watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. Marcus was becoming something unprecedented, a being with cosmic awareness who retained human values and perspective. "You could become like them?" Zaramoth observed one day as Marcus worked to restore a particularly damaged devourer consciousness. transcendent, beyond the limitations of physical existence. Marcus considered this, feeling the temptation of infinite perspective and unlimited power. But then he thought of Mrs. Johnson's cooking, of Sarah Martinez's laugh, of the satisfaction of solving a mechanical problem with nothing but stubborn persistence and dirty hands. "No," he said finally. "I think I'm more useful as a bridge than as another god. The universe needs someone who remembers what it's like to be small and confused and mortal, someone who can translate between the perspective of infinity and the perspective of right now." As the last of the corrupted devourers were restored to their original nature as cosmic gardeners, the ancient wanderer faced a choice of its own. It could return to transcendent existence, becoming once again part of the fundamental structure of reality. Or it could take a different path. "I want to try mortality," it announced, its thoughts carrying surprise at its own decision. "I want to experience existence from the perspective of a single moment, a single life, a single limited viewpoint. I want to understand what it means to love something you might lose." The transformation was gradual, taking place over several weeks. The vast cosmic entity slowly condensed itself into something smaller, more limited, more vulnerable. When the process was complete, the being that had once commanded entropy itself stood before them in a form that was almost, but not quite, human. "How do I know if I'm doing this right?" it asked Marcus, its voice now carrying the uncertainty of someone learning to be finite. "You don't," Marcus replied with a grin. "That's the point. You just do your best and hope it works out. And when it doesn't, you learn from the mistakes and try again." The entity, who chose the name Walker as a reminder of its wandering nature, nodded slowly. "This is terrifying." "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "But it's also amazing. Welcome to being alive." The return journey to Earth took longer than the trip out, partly because they stopped to check on the restored cosmic gardeners as they began their work of nurturing new life in previously empty regions of space, and partly because Marcus wanted time to figure out how to explain what had happened to Mrs. Johnson when they finally arrived at the Sol system. Marcus was surprised to find that he had changed enough that Earth felt strange to him now. The planet looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, but also more precious. Every human life on its surface seemed like a miracle of complexity and consciousness that had somehow emerged from simple chemistry and time. "Will you stay?" Vexhai asked as they prepared to land. Marcus looked around at his companions, the Cathara who had become his adopted family, Walker who was still learning to exist in limited dimensions, the restored ship mind that had insisted on personally carrying him home to thank him for its freedom. Then he looked down at Earth, at the blue marble where Mrs. Johnson was probably worrying about him and Sarah Martinez was probably wondering why he'd never asked her to prom. "For a while," Marcus said. "I want to finish high school. Maybe go to college. Fix some cars with my uncle. Be 17 for the rest of being 17. And after that?" Zaramoth asked. Marcus smiled, feeling the ancient wanderer Mark's pulse gently under his skin, no longer burning with cosmic purpose but simply humming with contentment. "After that, I'll probably come back out here. The universe is a big place and there's a lot of life that needs protecting. A lot of beauty that needs nurturing. A lot of gods who need to learn how to be parents," Walker added, still marveling at the concept of linear time. "That too," Marcus agreed, as the ship landed in the parking lot behind his uncle's auto repair shop. Marcus Chun prepared to do the hardest thing he had ever done, explain to his foster parents why he had been gone for 8 months without calling, and why he looked exactly the same age as when he'd left but somehow seemed older than the stars themselves. Some challenges, he reflected, were beyond the scope of cosmic awareness to solve. Some things just required being human, being patient, and hoping that love was enough to bridge the gap between what was and what could be. Behind them, the universe continued its ancient dance of creation and destruction, order and chaos, love and loss. But now it danced with the knowledge that somewhere in a small auto repair shop in Seattle, a young man who had learned to speak the language of gods was content to speak the language of home. The marks under his skin pulsed once, gently, and then settled into silence. The universe was safe for now. And Marcus Chen was exactly where he needed to be.